Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. It doesn't seem to matter if the policy the police espouse is broken windows, stop and frisk, zero tolerance, or quality of life. The results always seem to show a disproportionate impact on people of color. The Police Reform Organizing Project, a police monitoring organization, works to correct police tactics that harm the city's low-income communities and people of color. Bob Gangi, the executive director, is my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we've just come through an era where all the attention was paid to stop and frisk.
Right.
Because what?
The
people arrested were
right.
all people of color.
Right. The stop and frisk was a tactic, the use of which greatly expanded during the Bloomberg-Kelly years. And what the evidence was showing more and more, and because of litigation, the NYPD had to produce the numbers of stop and frisk, not only how many took place, but also the racial composition of the people stopped and whether they got summonses or arrested or let go. The numbers became more and more, I think shocking is fair to say. So by the end of 2011, I think, well, maybe it was 2012, what the numbers showed is that the NYPD had made over 685,000 stops, 87%, 88% people of color, and only 12% either got a ticket or were arrested. 88% of the people were let go at that point. And what we began to learn, and the press began to learn, and other people doing police reform work began to learn, is that young black and brown men were stopped repeatedly. So if you went into an inner city community of color and even randomly began to talk to black or brown boys, men, late teens, early 20s, 25, they would tell you these stories that I get stopped every week. I get stopped sometimes twice a day. And I'm running an errand for my mother, or I'm coming home from school. Even a few police officers began to speak out, saying that they were tired of doing this. I'm stopping kids who were going to the grocery store. I'm stopping kids who were doing nothing wrong at all, but I'm under pressure to make these stops to meet a quota. Because we have, within the NYPD, we've come to understand that there is a quota. There used to be a very heavily enforced quota for stops. There still is an aggressively enforced quota for arrests and for tickets.
But the NYPD, two things. One is that was declared unconstitutional.
Right.
So they had to abandon that policy.
Right.
And also we had an election and a new police commissioner and a new theory of broken windows, right? Which is if somebody's doing some kind of quality of life or what?
Right.
But these things
broken windows, the theory behind broken windows, and it is a theory, is that if you address minor infractions that represent some kind of social disorder, you will make significant headway in stopping serious crimes. It's important to remember that it's a theory and actually an unproven theory. But I want to get back to the stop and frisk issue for a moment. Yeah. The use of stop and frisk began to decline significantly in the last year of Kelly and Bloomberg's tenure. So in 2013, there was a precipitous drop in the number of stops that the NYPD made. So that, and part of the reason it happened was not only because of the court ruling that it was unconstitutional, it was enormously unpopular, not only in the low-income communities of color where it took place, but the editorial boards began to speak out about it, and more people, you might call from the prosperous classes, middle-class people, upper-class people, also found it objectionable. So it became politically untenable. De Blasio and all the other mayoral candidates from the Democratic Party primary spoke out against it. And de Blasio in particular obviously got a lot of press attention because he was speaking out against the use of stop and frisk. So when de Blasio became mayor, he and Bratton, his police commissioner, basically embraced the decline in the use of stop and frisk, which had already begun to take place under Kelly and Bloomberg. Bratton, as you're mentioning, is a very vocal proponent of broken windows theory of policing. And again, broken windows theory is that if you address, curtail low-level infractions, people carrying an open alcohol container in public, people riding a bike on the sidewalk. A lot of it refers to or relates to subway infractions, walking between two subway cars, putting your foot up on the subway seat, that you will make headway in curtailing serious crime. It's a theory not proven, and there have been some major police officials, very credible police officials. Probably the most notable is a man named Jack Maple.
Jackie Maple.
Yeah, who used to...
The MTA.
Right. Maple was considered the godfather of CompStat. And CompStat basically...
I don't want to talk about it. I
Okay.
want to get back. I
All
want
right,
to get
so-
back to something.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So Maple sort of famously quoted as saying, very skeptical about broken windows. He would say things like, and I love these quotes, the rapists and murderers don't decide to get out of town because there's less graffiti on the subways. Squeegee men don't take out contracts to murder people because there's a high level of tolerance for squeegeeing. So the theory's never been proven. But we at Prop don't necessarily even object to the theory. What we object to, and it's a really important distinction, is how it's implemented in New York City.
Okay, now let me just ask you something.
Okay.
The people who were stopped, stop and frisk, and on whom they found no marijuana
Right.
or anything,
Right.
just left.
Right.
Right? The people they stop under broken windows, they're stopped because they've either walked between a subway car
Right.
or they've taken up 2 seats or they've
Right.
done that. I want to ask you for a more comprehensive list.
Sure.
And they've already done something, and they are even either given
A
a
summons
ticket
or,
a summons.
or
What,
they're
now,
arrested?
tell me the differences. What a ticket is a fine,
No, a ticket is another word for a summons.
summons.
So if...
which means they have to go to court.
Right. In other words, they're not arrested. The cops don't put handcuffs on them, taken to the precinct house. They're given a summons, and then they have to appear in the summons court at a particular date and time.
So no one is usually arrested under broken windows philosophy.
Well, no. What happens is you can be arrested for some of these low-level infractions. So in New
Is
York
that up
City,
to the judgment of the police officer?
it's our view is it's mainly a function of the quota system. So the police officer is under pressure to hit these numbers of arrests and tickets in a given month.
The police,
So-
but the police department says they don't have a quota system.
Right, but that's everyone. I mean,
A
it's
quota system is illegal.
yes, quotas are illegal.
So
the
now we
police
have
woman-
goals.
Right, we have they're called productivity goals, but everyone thinks of them. Anyone who knows anything about policing thinks of them as quotas. I had a conversation with a police officer who was working in my local bank. I made a deposit. It was over the summer. I overheard him speaking to a couple of the tellers about how the police officers who had tried to arrest Eric Garner and ended up killing him had handled that situation all wrong. So I engaged him in a conversation, and at one point I said, and it was particularly unfortunate because Garner wasn't doing anything seriously wrong. It was a minor infraction.
He's just selling a
Selling
cigarette.
loose cigarettes. And the officer said, without prompting from me, he said, well, we have quotas. And they're unwritten. They're different for different communities. So in what he termed, quote unquote, a bad neighborhood, meaning inner city neighborhoods, primarily black and brown neighborhoods, the quota is higher. In a neighborhood like the Midwest side where I live, where the bank was, it's much lower. And
So the police officers are under pressure
right,
to issue
tickets and
tickets,
arrests.
summons,
And sometimes you can get, a cop will arrest you. We know of instances where cops have arrested people for jaywalking who didn't have a criminal history. Cops can arrest people and do arrest people for what they call open alcohol containers. Riding a bike on the
you
sidewalk.
have a bottle in a paper bag.
Right. And
Riding
even
a bike on
even
the
if you're
on the
not
sidewalk, right?
right, even if you're not being disruptive, even if you're not drunk,
Sleeping on the subway.
sleeping on the subway, if you're occupying 2 seats, they'll arrest you. We were doing petitioning on Saturday, where we go to different communities in New York and ask people to sign a petition calling for major police reforms. One black man who stopped and signed said, I get harassed all the time. The last time I got a ticket is I fell asleep on the subway at 1 o'clock in the morning, nobody else on the car, and they gave me a ticket. And the problem with the high level of summonses is that people often don't show up in court at the appointed date and time. And if you don't show up in court, the court issues a warrant on you, which means you are in effect a fugitive. So the next time you get stopped, even if it's for a minor infraction like walking between subway cars, the police officer can run a check on you on the spot, and if the check finds that you have an outstanding summons, the officer has to arrest you. It's the policy of the NYPD.
So then you stand the risk of being put in the system and being in jail for
right.
a couple of days.
And you're also, in effect, criminalized. You know, the rhetoric that we and other advocates use is broken windows type policing, quality of life type policing, whatever name you give to it, in effect criminalizes, literally, and the numbers, we're not exaggerating, hundreds of thousands of people every year.
So it's almost worse than stop and frisk.
Yes, in some very real
insidious
way.
way.
But stop and frisk was also, even though the term wasn't widely used during the Bloomberg-Kelly years, was a function of broken windows, which is you go after people for minor infractions, you create a very aggressive police presence in certain neighborhoods. Your way of communicating to the people who live in that neighborhood is we're not going to tolerate even the slightest sign of social disorder. But in the implementation of it, the NYPD uses tactics that are very aggressive. Police officers, and we hear this often, are frequently very rude, very disrespectful. And when we do the kind of petitioning that we were doing on Saturday, we hear a whole range of stories of police misconduct. And we hear all too often that people say, I hate the police. And they hate the police because of bad experiences they have. Two of the people who signed our petition on Saturday were young white women. They're aspiring actors. They go to the Tisch NYU school. They have been ticketed for walking in the park after dark. And even though they felt that was safer than having to walk all around the park to get to wherever they were going. And the officers that they interacted with were clearly indicating to them that we have to do this because we have to meet our quota.
So are there any statistics about the number of people who actually have to go to court under broken windows as compared to the number of actual arrests?
We have numbers on arrests. The summons numbers are harder to come by, so we don't have precise numbers about.
You have people that go to the court.
We have people that go to
arraignment court.
Primarily the arraignment parts, because we figured the most sure way, the most certain way of determining what police practices are is to go to the arraignment parts, and we go to the arraignment parts in the 4 major boroughs. We haven't gone to Staten Island yet. And because every arrest has to go through the arraignment part. So that's a way where you could see who's being arrested and what they're being charged with. So for example, there are about 250,000 misdemeanor arrests every year in New York City. And misdemeanors are low-level infractions, and it could be something like fare beating, it could be...
Like what?
Fare beating, which is sneaking out to the subway. It could be trespass. They still arrest people for trespass in housing projects in particular. And the story we've heard fairly regularly is the black teenagers, 17, 18-year-olds, saying, now, I got arrested for trespass when I was standing outside of my own building. It's part of aggressive policing. It's sometimes called proactive policing, and it's also the pressure to meet your quota.
Does a misdemeanor go on a record?
Yes. Violations go on a record. Violations, often people charged with misdemeanors will plead guilty to disorderly conduct, which is a quote-unquote a violation. Technically, it's not a crime, but it goes on your record. One of the other things that we found is that of the roughly 230,000, 250,000 misdemeanor arrest dispositions in New York City courts every year, about 90% of the people do not serve any significant punishment, do not go to jail, do not go to prison.
They just have the inconvenience of going.
Inconvenience,
and the risk,
so
if they don't go, they have the warrant.
Right. So they could be acquitted. The charges sometimes are dismissed. Even the prosecutors decline to prosecute anywhere between 8 to 10% of the cases every year. So part of our point about these misdemeanor arrests is not only are you targeting low-level infractions, not only are you targeting people of color, 85 to 90% of the people arrested on a misdemeanor in New York City, people of color, virtually all the people, or 90% of the people, walk out of the courtroom, so you're not having much of an effect on public safety. And what you're doing, again, it's a cliche to say so, but it's true. You are intensifying the distrust that people have and the antagonism that people have.
The
for
other
the police.
side of that is when you're angry and distrustful, the cops have to react also to that feeling.
Right.
So it's such an unproductive thing, both sides.
It
must be very difficult if you're a police officer with good intentions and you're immediately questioned and somebody, that is not what you became a police officer for.
Right.
So we see that tension.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. The Police Benevolence Association, which is the trade union for cops, has spoken out very strongly against the quota system. And it's one of the few policy areas where we advocates for police reform and the PBA take the same position. Because what they've said, Pat Lynch has said, who's the head of the PBA, is that it's absolutely the wrong way to go about creating a better relationship between the police and the community.
So you are saying that the police department should abandon the whole basic structure they operate on right now.
Yeah.
And do what?
Should abandon broken windows policing, should abandon the quota system, should create a different system for measuring police performance. Because, clearly there is a need, if you have 35,000 police officers, to come up with some systematic way of evaluating performance and productivity. Right now, the quota system only gives credit for police engaging in punitive interactions with the community. One cop once said to me, one of the few cops on the force who would speak to me, that if I break up a fight between two boys and send them home, I don't get any credit. If I happen to help deliver a baby in an emergency, I don't get any credit. I'll get credit for if I give out a seatbelt ticket or make a stop. And the importance of that quote for me was it illustrated how the current form of policing by New York City cops turns on its head the idea that most people have a good policing. So we're recommending that the NYPD give credit to cops for constructive interactions. So instead of arresting the homeless man who's sleeping under a stairwell in a public housing project for trespass, bring that man to a neighborhood service organization who could help that person get back on his feet. Also, give credit for people who have meetings with local clergy, who meet with the local Chamber of Commerce, who are trying to develop relationships with the community and then engage in problem solving with the community to address what are the real difficult issues that plague that community.
Within the police force in a precinct, a police officer notes everything he's done?
I don't know if that happens. What we know, it might, but I'm not aware of that. But what happens is once the police officer gives out a ticket or makes an arrest, he or she notes that, communicates that with his or her superior officers, and gets credit for that. And it's also notable that the officer will get credit for the arrest or the ticket, even if it's thrown out during the court process.
So what we need is to find a way to assess a day in the life of a police officer.
That could help, right. Well, also what we need to do, certainly in our view, and I've talked to a few police officers, mainly retired police officers will communicate with us. And what they've said is that the local captains of a precinct, if they're good at their job, they will know who the good officers are. They will know who the officers that are abusing their authority or that are slacking off. So give more responsibility for evaluating performance to the local precinct captains.
Community policing, what does that mean?
Well, it's a broad umbrella and different people apply it to different forms of policing. What it means in our view, and we promote community policing, is that the pressure to engage in punitive interactions is removed. Cops don't get credit just because they make a lot of arrests, but you emphasize the need for police officers, and not just police officers, but other agencies within city government to work collaboratively with the community to solve the problems in the community.
But has that ever worked without a quota system? Historically?
Our sense of it is that it has, that there are other cities. In Boston, there was a famous experiment where instead of engaging in arrest and jail and prison sentences for the people that were involved in gang activity, there was an effort to, first of all, have the officers collaborate with leaders in the community, particularly the clergy, to meet with the gang members and then communicate to the gang members, we know who you are, we're watching you, we want to give you an opportunity to break away from the criminal lifestyle that you're engaged in. We'll help you with training, we'll help you get back to school, we'll help you find jobs if you cooperate with us. If you don't, if you continue the gang activity, if you continue selling drugs, again, we know who you are and we're going to take you in.
You know what's interesting?
And that was effective. As you would, almost common sense tells you that not every young black or brown man in that particular community in Boston will respond to that, but probably a lot will.
It reminds me of what we would like to see with people coming out of prison. It's the same kind of community involvement and support system, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. It's all tied in together, isn't it?
I mean, it is, and all too often, the people you describe coming out of prison 5-10 years ago were the young people we're talking about now, who, because of this very aggressive form of policing, become criminalized and are more likely to end up in jail and prison, or more likely to end up in the margins of society, just barely getting by. One of the challenges for us, for the advocates for reform, is that the extraordinary split in how different races and classes of people in New York City see the police officers. When I first started doing this work 3.5 years ago, almost all my white friends would say something like, when I see a police officer, I feel safer. And virtually every person of color I spoke to would say something really very different. If I see a police officer, I cross to the other side of the street because I'm worried about whatever interaction could take place that could...
well, that's what breeds that.
Right.
That is that disparity.
And then also, if you talk to white parents and black or brown parents, my wife and I raised 2 sons on the west side of Manhattan. They're now 41 and 37. Never, always worried about them, still worry about them, never worried about a police interaction. Black and brown parents, they'll tell you about a very different experience.
You know, as we look at Ferguson, I mean, that's an extreme example of fines, the use of arrests and then the fines. And in Ferguson, they said the fines, that if you couldn't pay it, you just landed up in jail until you could pay it.
Right.
And so that it was a way the system was financing its city's operations. I don't think we don't get that much money, do we, from the fines?
We get, I think, about $5 or $6 million a year.
But it's interesting to see how the state troopers, Robinson, Captain Robinson, how he deals in the community. And it will be interesting to see the results, what happens after they receive information about the grand jury and how they reorganize, because obviously they're much smaller than we, but they have that same problem of distrust
and also, I think it's
excessive
significant
arrest.
Politically that the Department of Justice is investigating police practices in Ferguson. The Department of Justice apparently is investigating, they haven't made a decision to do so, investigating whether they should investigate broken windows policing in New York City, and if it has a disparate impact on low-income people of color.
To go to court to get that into the court system?
I'm sorry, Ronnie?
Well, the same way the court decision on stop and frisk.
Right.
Are there going to have to be plaintiffs on?
No, this would be an investigation.
This is an internal.
Right. No, it would be the Department of Justice investigating whether or not.
But people could go to court with the charges. Right?
Yes, right. The part of the problem with the emphasis on stop and frisk the cops have amended the use of stop and frisk, but still engage in the same kind of harsh and aggressive law enforcement practices. We're considering, the paper is reporting, the Times is reporting that the de Blasio administration may change the response of the NYPD to marijuana possession from arrests to violations. We have to see how that actually is applied.
And that will also increase the warrants for arrest.
That would increase warrants, but also it may not stop arrest practices, so that if the police no longer want to focus on marijuana possession arrests as a way to target and harass low-income communities of color, they might pick up on other infractions or misdemeanor charges that they could apply. What we need to do is address the heart of the beast, which again is the harsh and punitive application of broken windows policing.
And the quota system.
And the quota system. The quota system drives broken windows.
Right. PROP does also have volunteers in its projects?
Yes.
Court monitoring and other projects?
Right. Yes.
And you have a website?
We have a website, Police Reform Organizing Project, the whole .org.
Or PROP NYC.
Right.
I've gotten it that way.
Oh, okay, great. You know more than I do.
I do.
We have a Facebook page. We're very interested. I appreciate you mentioning that, Ronnie. We're very interested in having people volunteer, either the Court Monitoring Project, our petition drive, helping us with research. And we have limited resources, so volunteers are very helpful.
And funding.
And funding, yes, yeah. Financial contributions are most welcome. Thank you.
Well, Bob Gangi, it's been very interesting, and I hope that you continue to do this work and that we find that we're going to have peace between the forces of people and the police. And
now we're going to keep carrying on this issue, and there are encouraging signs. I mean, de Blasio clearly is feeling the political heat around broken windows, which is why I think they're announcing the possible change in marijuana possession arrests. And this is only going to change if the political climate shifts, if the political landscape shifts, so that de Blasio would feel more pressure to move the department away from the harsh application of broken windows policing.
The state police, do they also work on a quota system?
My guess is yes, but I don't know for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, Bob Gangi.
Well, thank you, Ronnie. Okay. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.